And then we are going to create a new script, a new C# script, which is going to be called Localization Manager. And this is going to do a lot of the work for us. Let's double click that to open it. And so before I'm going to break this up into two pieces because this section is kind of long. So before I actually start scripting this, I'm going to explain the concepts that we're going to use, including the idea of using JSON, what a dictionary is, and the streaming assets folder. If you know what all those things are, you can skip ahead to the next section if you're watching the archive. But brief explanations of each of these things and the purpose of this script. So the purpose of this script is to load all of the localized text from a JSON file. So deserialize it into a localization data object, right, which is the class that we just created. And then we're going to use a loop to go through that and stick each of the things in that array that we just created into our dictionary so that we can access it via string keys, right? So for those who don't know what a dictionary is, the two-sentence explanation is that this is from MSDN, the dictionary T-key, T-value generic class provides a mapping from a set of keys to a set of values. Each addition to the dictionary consists of a value and its associated key. So basically, you can think of a dictionary as a collection where we can decide what we want to use as the address for each element, right? We could make it a string, we could make it a number, we could make it another object, right? Another class, or whatever we want. And then of course, as the data, as the value, we could store sprites or sounds or classes or strings as we have in this case. So why are we using it? That's what a dictionary is. And so one of the key aspects of it is that it's an unordered collection, right? If we use an array is going to be index 0, index 1, index 2, and there's a kind of inherent order to it. Because we're working with just a bunch of text that doesn't really have a linear order to it, a dictionary is going to be fine. Now, the benefit of using a dictionary in this case is that all of the keys, all of the addresses that we're going to use to look things up are strings and are human readable, right? So if you're reading through your JSON file or you're trying to figure out what this string is, you can say, oh, this is the game underscore title, or oh, this is the start underscore button, right? And so when you give this to a translator or you give it to your programmer, your game designer, or whatever, and they're setting things up, life is going to be much, much easier, right? Theoretically, you could just stick everything in a numbered array, but then you would have to think, oh, is game title index 0 or is it number 1? And things might get out of order and so on. So the major benefit here is that we're using human readable addresses, and therefore it's easy to know what data we're working with, and it's easy for everybody who's going to be working on it. Now, the data itself is going to be stored, let's just jump back to the streaming assets folder, right? I showed this briefly earlier. So we have two JSON formatted text files which are in this streaming assets folder. Now let's actually pull up the documentation for streaming assets. I talked about this during Quiz Game, but I kind of went over it quickly. So I wanted to give a little deeper dive into this. So here's the manual page for streaming assets. So most assets in Unity are combined into the project when it's built. However, it's sometimes useful to place files into the normal file system on the target machine to make them accessible via a path name. Then skipping ahead, any files placed in a folder called streaming assets, case sensitive, so it's got to have this name, right, in a Unity project will be copied verbatim to a particular folder on the target machine, and you can retrieve the folder using the application.streamingassetsPath property in your scripts, right? So the value of this is we have let's say we've given our game to a translator, right? Let's say we're an indie developer, we don't have a lot of money, but we do have a friend who speaks German, and we can just give them the game to go through and say, can you translate start game into German from English? And they agree to help us, but they don't know how to use Unity, right? Or they don't know how to do sort of more complex operations with the software, we could just give them a build of the game, the finished build of the game, along with this JSON text file, and just say, open this up, wherever you see key value, translate the thing from the English key to the English value, save that text file, and then that is going to be automatically populated back into the game, right? The text is being pulled at runtime from the text file into the built version of the game, right? This would also be useful if you wanted to download this stuff from a server. You don't have to download a whole large build of the game. You just have to download a little text file, and so on. So we're going to be using this streaming assets to be able to keep our data separate from our game files, in this case the built binary. Okay, so let's just see, before we get into the scripting, if we have any questions about any of those topics. Oh, and then I didn't give an explanation of JSON, super short explanation of JSON. JSON is a text-based data interchange format that can be read by many different programming languages and just allows us to store data in a text file in a human readable way, right? So I showed this a little bit before. This is a JSON for our localized English text, right? And just so it says we have a collection called items, that's our array, right? And then we have a variable called key, and then the value is game title, and then we have a variable called value, and then the value for that is quiz game, and then another key is start button and start game, right? So we have an array with 2 elements, and these are the names of the variables in there. And so if we wanted, we could just open this up, edit it, save it, and then it would be reloaded both in the Unity project and in the built version of the game. Okay, and if you want a definition of JSON, you can check out Quiz Game 2, where I talked a little bit more about it. But basically, it's just a format that we're using to save our data. And it's a format that exists outside of Unity and is accessible and usable by many different programming languages. Okay. And it's pretty user-friendly and easy to use. All right. So before I start programming, let us check on the chat. I'll take a few questions quickly, and then we're going to speed ahead. Somebody asking, can we use this on Android? Yes, you can. You just need to be aware that the streaming assets path works a little bit differently on Android. And if you just, I don't remember exactly how it works, but if you Google it, you can find it. I think maybe you need to use a www class to do it, but it's basically the same. So yeah, if you so some folks talking about using XML. If you prefer to use XML, you honestly could rewrite the system that we've got here fairly easily, because really there's about 2 lines of code that are actually doing the JSON part, and the rest is just serializing and deserializing the data. So you could literally replace those 2 lines with whatever XML parsing utility you want to use. We're using JSON because Unity has the built-in JSON utility, but there's a lot of third-party libraries to read and write many different formats.